1975, I moved to New York City. It was a place that I had barely even visited. But at the time, New York was the center of the publishing world in the United States, and I wanted to be where the action was, even though I didn't really have a clear idea of how I was going to accomplish this. I had been a photographer for a small weekly newspaper, but I was determined to go to New York and have a career as a photographer. And after 2 difficult years, I managed to get a job with the New York Post, which is a big metropolitan daily newspaper. I was the first female staff photographer. The Post specialized in pictures of celebrities, which was not really my interest. But one of the things that we had to do, we had an ongoing assignment to take pictures of what they called weather shots. And these were feature pictures that could be put into the newspaper whenever there was a space. And that was the part of my job that I liked the best, because I could drive around in my car waiting for the next assignment to come in on our 2-way radio. We had radios that went back to the city desk because this was the day before cell phones. And I could explore New York and just see what I could find. Now, this kind of photography was not new to me. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. My dad, Ben, and my uncle Harry owned a camera store. And my dad used to take me out on camera runs when I was 3 or 4 years old. He gave me my first camera when I was in nursery school. And this is exactly what we used to do. We used to go out looking for pictures. So for me, that was what photography was. And today, some 70+ years later, that is still the kind of photography that I like to do. I'm not really interested in dramatic lighting. I'm not interested in very unusual angles. I don't really want to be an artist. I think of myself as a documenter. And today, I think I do exactly the same kind of photography that I did back then. As it turns out, photography and exploration, or images and exploration, have been together since the very beginning of expeditions. For example, this is a picture from 1590 of a New World exploration. Photographers have often gone along on expeditions. Frank Hurley went on the Shackleton expedition in 1914 and was trapped in the ice, but he still managed to save his plates and brought back remarkable photographs from that trip. So these kinds of photographs were published in magazines, newspapers, early photography catalogs advertised small cameras as being excellent for exploration. And I grew up on these magazines. My parents subscribed to Life and National Geographic, and that was what I wanted to do. So as soon as I could, when I graduated from college, I joined the Peace Corps, and I went and taught English in Thailand for 2 years. And at the end of that tour of duty, instead of buying a plane ticket home, I decided to buy a motorcycle. And I drove the motorcycle from Thailand to England, taking pictures all the way, through Iran, through Afghanistan, taking pictures along the way. Many of those pictures are similar to the pictures that I take today. These experiences really prepared me for an adventurous life in New York City. And when I first arrived in the city in 1975, the city was really going through some hard times. It was close to bankruptcy. There were vast areas of boarded up buildings and vacant lots. And these were really dangerous places because there was a lot of drug dealing. People didn't dare to go there. But for me, these were really interesting places to photograph. So while I was working for the newspaper, looking for those weather photographs, I used to drive through these neighborhoods, and I began a project looking for kids who were doing creative things, building things, while their parents weren't watching. So one day, I met a boy whom I had photographed with his pigeon coop, and he showed me his drawings in his notebook. And he explained to me that he was practicing his name, his nickname, which was He3. He was practicing his name to paint a wall. And he asked me, why don't you take pictures of graffiti? And actually, I had never really understood that graffiti, that I had seen everywhere in New York, were actually nicknames that kids had written on the wall. And as soon as he showed me that notebook and I saw that he was basically a designer designing a logo, I became interested, and he said, well, I can introduce you to a king of graffiti. And of course, that was something I couldn't turn down. And the king turned out to be Dandi, who in fact was a prolific train writer and widely admired for his style. So Dandi invited me to come back and spend a day with him and his friends in his room while he was designing. They all were designing their names in their notebooks. Because graffiti wasn't just a matter of writing your name, you had to write your name with style. But one of the things that impressed me about Dandi was that he always took a picture whenever he put a piece on a train. And he had a photo album, his own photo album of his own photographs. Just like the early explorers, he was documenting his own expeditions. And because I could take better pictures, I was a professional photographer, and I soon began to give them photos, I was welcomed into the world of graffiti. And pretty soon, I was so fascinated by it that I quit my full-time job at the Post, and I started going up to the Bronx, where there were these vast areas of open lots, but you could see the trains coming and going. And I spent hours and hours and hours just standing there, waiting for fresh, new graffiti pieces to come by on the train, and trying to vary the different backgrounds. For example, this piece, you can see there are two cars together. They both say Duster and Lizzie. Duster and Lizzie were a couple who wrote together. But one is in straight letters and the other is in wild style, just to show you the vast differences in style that you could write your name. So finally, after about a year of documenting these trains, Dandi invited me to come to the yards and actually see how one of these big pieces was painted. So this was really instrumental because I had not really been able to understand how they could reach the top of the trains, for example. So going to the yards, I got to see how they use their sketchbooks, how they managed to space out their names according to where the windows were, how they could climb up to the top, bracing against the cars. And this is the train that was painted that night. Beautiful top to bottom. So, of course, like most explorers, I wanted to publish my findings. That turned out to be totally difficult. I teamed up with another photographer, Henry Chalfant, who had also been documenting trains, and together we probably sent out 50 proposals to publishers with no results, because American publishers did not want to glorify vandalism. Finally, we found Thames and Hudson in England, who published a very slim volume, Subway Art, 96 pages, paperback, did not do very well, got absolutely no press. But slowly but surely, the books began to disappear out of bookstores and into the hands of the graffiti writers. And the reason that this book became so popular was because this was before the internet, and this was the only way that they could see how the actual letters were styled. So the book became a guide, like a style guide. Pretty soon, other artists began appropriating space for art. Artists like Keith Haring and Basquiat. And this was the beginning of what we now call street art. And the real difference between street art and graffiti is that street art is about imagery, where graffiti is more about lettering. So if you often will see a wall, a big street wall with an image on it that has been gone over by graffiti lettering, because there's an ongoing battle between the two camps, the street art and graffiti, although there is a lot of overlap. Now, the traditional tools of a graffiti writer are paint and markers. But since then, there have been some innovations, such as filling fire extinguishers with paint. Because this is a way that you can very quickly spray your name very high and very illegally. Now, Now today, there are shops that specialize in graffiti supplies, and there are manufacturers, many paint manufacturers that manufacture paint, especially for graffiti. One of these manufacturers is Krink, a former graffiti writer. He actually manufactures a fire extinguisher for use for graffiti, but like many graffiti writers and street artists, his work is in demand in galleries and museums, and here he is in the Pera Museum in Istanbul, having sprayed an art piece inside the museum with a fire extinguisher. Street artists are not limited to paint and markers. They use absolutely every kind of material available. Yarn bombing is one very popular form. This is Oleg, who is like the queen of crochet. So now street art is found around the world. It's considered the biggest art movement that's ever been in the history of the world. And it's found in many unusual places, such as Dakar, Senegal, islands like the Azores, in Bangkok, Tahiti. This year, Tahiti, where published a stamp from a street artist, Seth, in a page of stamps, and you can see that they put a very cool spray can. This is the Tahitian government published this stamp. Very cool spray can with Tahitian designs around this, the bottom of this page of stamps. So who could have ever expected that? But the gold standard of graffiti, the ultimate achievement of any graffiti writer, is still to write your name on a train. That hasn't changed. There have been many technical innovations. There are walls being painted today that can only be seen online. Insa has something that he calls graffiti. He laboriously paints 4 layers on a wall, then puts them together, puts them online, and it looks something like this. So the original wall is hand-painted, but you can only see it if you go online. There are all kinds of new audiences for street art and graffiti. I've been working on a project, Goldman Global Arts in Miami, where street artists and graffiti writers are painting walls inside the Miami Dolphins Stadium, which is a very unlikely place. There's a growing interest in what's called artivism. This is a house designed by Swoon, who worked with engineers to build houses in Haiti after the earthquake, sustainable architecture that they can build themselves. So this is really of interest to me, street art for a cause. There's a Pangea Seed Foundation, has artists painting walls to create awareness about pressing environmental issues, ocean issues. And this is a wall painted by Faith 47 with a seabird entangled in twine. But my favorite artivism project is called Pimp My Carosa. And I've been working with Mundana, who's here, on this project. He got hundreds of carts together of the recyclable collectors in Brazil and had street artists paint them, but also worked with the community to help the collectors, give them things like eyeglasses if they needed it, new shoes if they needed it, safety reflectors, and also to raise awareness of the importance of recycling, but also giving visibility and respect to the people who do it. And so Mundano also came to New York, and we've tried to get a similar thing going in New York City. So one of the things that I most admire about graffiti writers and street artists, but I admire the illegal part where they appropriated space for art and they just put their work out there. They didn't wait for a gallery to decide whether their work was good enough. They're bold enough to put their work out there and let the public decide if they like it or not. And this, to me, is extremely appealing. And now that digital photography has put cameras in the hands of all of us, I feel like we can all be explorers. We can all be documenters. And this is a way we can preserve what we want to preserve. And this is putting history into our own hands. We become the historians. And so whether you're circumnavigating the globe or you're going around your block, I urge you to take your camera, have your camera ready. You never know what might be the next big thing. And go out there, shoot, and more importantly, get it out there, like online. Okay, that's it. I'm going to take a picture of you.